Okay. So Jerry, you're muted at the moment because we're setting up the YouTube live stream. And while we're waiting for the go-ahead from Arlene, I just want to say hello to everyone. We're all super excited that you're here. I'm super excited that we figured out how to get you online. And I just want to do a few little housekeeping things. That there's a chat little bubble at the bottom of your screen. Probably some of you have been at the summit all week and you know how to do all this, but for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, that chat, if you hit that, it opens up a window to the side and you'll be able to chat amongst yourselves. And I'm sure you'll have lots of things to say as Jerry starts telling his stories. And then we'll leave some time for questions near the end. And we'll use that question and answer function. And we'll see how that unfolds. We'll keep it wide open until we're ready to go. All right, there's a lot of excitement and we are live. So I'm going to unmute Jerry. Good evening, everyone. Of course, I know it's not evening everywhere. And welcome to the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. My name is Lavinia Plonka and I am so excited to present Jerry Karzen, who is going to be speaking to us about his adventures with Moshé Feldenkrais. Jerry studied with Moshe Feldenkrais at the Feldenkrais Institute in Tel Aviv from 1976 to 1983. He was also Dr. Feldenkrais's personal traveling companion, secretary, and close friend. Dr. Feldenkrais chose Jerry to be a trainer in 1982, and Jerry has been the organizer and director of according to him, some 40 trainings in 9 countries over the years. And he's currently the educational director for Feldenkrais trainings in Germany and Brazil. And there's so much more, but I'm not going to spend the time talking about all that. I'm going to let Jerry do the talking. Jerry, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Lavinia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're a little soft, but we can hear you well enough.
Okay, I'll bring this a little closer.
Oh,
maybe.
that's really good. That's really
okay.
Wonderful.
Great.
So there are so many things. It's interesting, the list you sent me of questions that I might ask. I thought to myself, well, I want the answers to all of those questions, but then we'd be here for, about a week. So
no, I'll answer them all in about 3 seconds.
Oh, really? Okay. Sure. Well, the thing that I think people would really love to know is how you met Moshé and how you became friends.
Oh, that's what you want to know about Moshé.
Well, to start. No, that's about
I met
you.
Moshé. Okay, I met Moshé in when I joined the Feldenkrais training in 1975. I wasn't friendly with him then. Actually, I was a little frightened of him at times because at the end of that, almost on the last day of that training, he spoke to me in French. I don't know how he knew that I knew French, which I did because I lived for some years in West Africa. But he said, "Vous êtes comme une vache qui pisse," which means you're like a cow pissing. And needless to say that I stayed in the back of the room and never came out. But the following year, I found some housing for him. And you really want to know this story? It's a funny story.
It's a funny story, and I think it just gives us a taste of his color.
Okay. Well, he definitely had color. That's a good way to put it. Anyway, I'm showing him, I found some housing for him and the assistants for the training program that we had in San Francisco. And as I was showing him around the apartment that he was going to live in, I told him that I had to go to the bathroom, and he said, "So do I." And I said, "Well, you can go to the one at the end. I'll go to the one at the end of the hall. You can go to the other one." And he said, "No, I'll go with you." And that was kind of, what do I say? So we went to the bathroom together, and while we're urinating together, he tells me a story. And the story is that when he was a graduate student at the Sorbonne, And Frederick Joliot was walking around showing him. He said, Joliot said to him, I have to go to the bathroom. Moshe said, I have to go. And so the two of them stood on top of this table and were peeing into this little hole together in the savannah, in the laboratory or whatever. And at the end of which, Joliot says to Moshe, okay, now that we've done this together, we'll be friends forever. And Moshe turns to me because we're finished peeing, and he says, okay, now you and I will be friends forever. So I guess from that point on, I wasn't exactly so afraid of him anymore.
So it's not exactly like blood brothers, but
It is not like blood brothers, yes. And I don't know how women would do it either, but that's how it happened.
That's okay. We don't need to go there.
No,
So I'm curious, was it you who had the idea for the Amherst training? How did that come about?
Amherst training. I knew that people were asking him to make some workshops and another training after my training. And I knew that they would want a certain large percentage of the revenue for that training. And I kind of sensed that, and I heard things. And so I sent him an email. No, I didn't send him an email. There weren't computers then. I wrote him a letter and said, I'll do it for you. Moshe and I already had a nice relationship because at the end of the second year of the training program in San Francisco, he invited me to come to Israel and be sort of a secretary and do things with him. And when I lived in San Francisco and he was teaching in San Francisco, I used to do banking for him. And I found out that was very unusual, that Moshe trusted other people with his money, which he did. And I used to get stamps for him for things and go shopping for him because he was all alone in San Francisco. And I always felt someone needed to help this guy out. He had something to contribute to the world. And if I could make his life a little bit easier, that would be nice. So I wrote him the letter, and he wrote back a letter to me, and it was a one-line thing. I've got the letter somewhere or other. It was one sentence. Okay, if you want to make a training, go ahead. And because he knew that I would do it. So I wrote back and said, okay. And then he wrote back a letter and says, okay, there's money in the bank. Take out whatever you need and do it. So that's how the Amherst training came to be.
So I know that a lot of us who were not at the Amherst training have, purchased the DVD set from IFF, and there's this mysterious thing that takes place in the first couple of weeks where there's no video. Right. And I've always wondered, was it a technical glitch? Why was there no video?
It wasn't a technical. Well, it wasn't. Moshe, it took me a long time to get Moshe to agree to let me tape him, to videotape him and to record him, because after that year in San Francisco, and I went to Israel, and I was watching him. I stayed with him for about 3 months in his house, and I would go daily with him when he worked on people, and I would go to Alexandria and High and things like that. And I thought, this is terrible. He should be recorded somehow. Mm-hmm. And he never wanted to do it. A lot of it was, he said, oh, you're worried I'm going to die, huh? And you're going to do something. And he didn't like talking about dying. That he had a notion that he was going to live forever. But he had another real strong reason, which I could understand. In those days, I had a hard time understanding, but now I really do. He said, if people watch what I'm doing, they will copy what I'm doing, and they won't sense what I'm doing. They won't feel what I'm doing. They won't understand. And I don't want them to copy me. And so he was very, very reluctant to having himself videotaped. So before the Amherst training started, we were communicating mostly by letter and very rarely by telephone. I said, I'm going to send you some, he said he would do it. And I said, I'm going to send you some people who will record the training program. And he said, okay. So when I arrived and he arrived in Amherst and I said, where are these people? He said, well, and he kind of hemmed and hawed and he kind of did all that. And he said he didn't hire anybody. So I, needless to say, got a bit upset with him, but I knew he might do something like that. I just sensed that. So I organized to have a couple of people do recordings of the training program. And it took me a couple of weeks to find another crew who would come and actually do the videotaping. So that's why for the first few weeks, there's no video. And then, of course, he didn't want anyone to videotape his private lessons, the FI lessons after class. So I said, I'll do it. And then there was myself, and at that time I had a lady friend, and she helped me, and I carried the thing on my shoulder and videotaped all of those in 1980. By 1981, I just got tired of carrying that camera all the time, because in those days the cameras were not like these little things that we have now,
Big, giant things, yeah.
Big things, and it weighed a lot. My shoulder is still recovering from those days, to be honest. And so I asked a few of the fellows who were in the training and to help me in the 1981, and we used a different camera. So the materials that were recorded in 1980, those lessons of him working, they're not as good because the camera wasn't as good, and we used a different size of videotape in the second summer. Okay, so
right.
it's like that. It's a long answer to your short question.
Well, no, but I mean, we're all so grateful for that, even though none of us will ever actually succeed at imitating Moshé. We really
don't say that on his birthday. I think he would be happy if some of us could imitate him.
But we'd still be just an imitation. Yes.
Maybe.
But it's nice to celebrate his birthday. So those years that you were in Israel, what was it like to live with him?
To live with Moshé?
I mean, you don't have to give me all the details, but I mean, did you hang out together?
Well, I lived in his house a couple of times. First time, 3 months. Living with him was different. Depends if we were on the road. It depends if we were in Amherst. It depends if it was in his own house. In his own house, he had his schedule. Moshé's culinary, it's really, he lived during the war. He lived in Israel when there was very little food. And we all develop certain things that make us feel at home. So for breakfast, for example, he would have Spam. I don't know if you know what Spam is.
I do. Probably people under 40 might not know, but
yeah, well, it was a thing that you take all of the meat and all the byproducts, excuse me, animals, and you squeeze it all together, and you fry it. Well, he would chop it up in pieces, throw it in this hot burning oil, and he'd have that. Then when that got finished, he would throw in an egg, a raw egg, and fry it to death. But he loved that. But at the same time, excuse me a moment. At the same time, he was, he had lived in France. He knew fine wines. He knew cognac. And his sister would always, whenever she lived in France, Malta, she was coming, she'd always bring cheeses for him. And I mean, they were really great cheeses. And he loved chocolate cake, and we ate a lot of chocolate cake. And when I lived together with him in San Francisco, he was a funny kind of a guy. The first time we sat down to eat for example, he was sitting opposite me at a table and he started just eating off my plate. He didn't say, "Do you mind if I taste this?" But it was like, I don't know, he was just this kind of sometimes voracious kind of animal, really, in a way. And yet at the same time, there was times where he was a real gentleman. His house was, you ask how he lived, his home was very, Jeff Haller described it, I think, the best of anyone I've met. It was a library with a bed in it. It was just were books everywhere, and he had read them, and he had a photographic memory. And many people tell stories about how you'd ask him a question, and he'd say, "Well, there's a green book on da 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 shelf, and if you go to the fourth chapter, then that's your answer." I mean, I would ask him questions like that, and he would do that, and then I'd say, how long ago did you read this book?" And he'd tell me, "Oh, maybe 5 years ago," or something like that. And other people would tell you the same thing. So it was a bed, you know, it was very humble, very simple, you know, in a certain kind of way, full of books. He had a wonderful older lady. He admired her because she used to come and clean the apartment. And he just loved how agile she was and get on her knees and do like that. And he was a mix of a lot of things. Like the room that I stayed in the back part of the house was, oh, it's hard to describe. It was full of it. I don't know, maybe because he never, you know, he lived through difficult times, so he saved anything. But he was the most curious human being I've ever encountered. The room that I lived in, well, I'm curious too. I was curious, what kind of a guy is this that I'm living in his house? So I would go through some of those drawers in that room.
Oh, really?
Of course, of course. I mean, of course. Well, Moshé, look, it was nothing strange to go to some people's house with Moshé, and he would disappear for 10 minutes. And then where is he? He would be upstairs going through their closet, or he'd be going through. No, seriously, to see how they live. He was curious. He was a curious guy. Whenever we went shopping, I could never, if you went into a department store, I would walk in and he would suddenly be off on the side examining stuff. You could never, it wasn't like you walked through to get something. He has to see everything. He has to know everything. He has to observe everything. When the camera came, he took photography of a lot of his judo stuff and of his book for Awareness Through Movement. He's the photographer. And when that camera came, this great big TV camera came to Amherst, my God, the first thing he did was run over and start looking and, well, how does it work? And he was just curious. Well, anyway, the room that I was living in the first 3 months, just there was piles of stuff that was taken apart but never put together. He was just, it was that kind of he was that kind of a man.
Wow. So you had lessons. He gave you FIs, didn't he?
Yes.
So can you share anything about that
Those
experience?
FIs.
Or one in particular,
Actually, I was thinking of doing that. I was planning on talking about two of them. I was hoping to, primarily because of some of the conversations that people before, because I've been watching, of course, some of the people on the summit. So I'll tell you about maybe two lessons that he gave me. The first one and maybe one later on, because I know that Russell is going to talk about it in the work, and I'm really curious about that word because so many people talk about embodiment. because, and also Donna Ray spoke about how the lessons that we give people, we always start with the pattern, and that we do gentle movements and easy movements and stuff like that. And so I wanted to comment about, I'll talk about the lessons in relationship to Russell's embodiment thing, which I don't know what he's going to say, which I'm curious, very curious. And to Donna Ray's, what she talked about a little bit. And also to this notion about that we are gentle with people and everything. So I will describe Moshé, a lesson with Moshé, and other people would describe it actually the same way, is that if you're, let's say, you know, people who work with clay, a potter, and they have a clay thing going around, and let us say you're the clay, and Moshé is the potter, okay?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when you're with his lessons where you can say whatever you want, but it doesn't matter. He's going to do what he wants with you, and you should just let him do his thing, because he's molding you and he's doing what he wants to do with you. So I'll give you an example. At my first lesson, it was, I don't know, do you know who Ida Rolf is? You know Rolfing. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He and Ida Rolf were very good friends and had a great admiration for one another. Whether or not they would accept each other's work, that's another matter, but they had great respect for each other. Oh, anyway, in San Francisco, she was living in this building and he was living in the same one at that time. She was giving the workshop and he was giving the workshop. And I had my lesson. So I'll just tell you what and you know that the rolfing can be very painful sometimes if the person is not that adept at being a good rolfer. And I've had 2 sets of rolfing lessons from someone who was very adept, and it was a beautiful stuff, and from someone who I thought they were killing me, and I stopped after the 7th lesson. But Moshé, just everything that he touched me in that lesson, I was screaming from pain. It was so painful and so difficult, and so I thought he was killing me. Anyway, about a third of the way through, I looked up, he was over my head, and I said, Moshé, Ida Rolf is 3 floors above you, and you're rolfing me, and you're killing me. And he just said, shut up. He hit me on my face, told me, be quiet and let me do my job. That was his response to me, okay?
Wow.
But of course, at the end of the lesson, I stood up. And I never had an experience like that in my life, even though I had been in San Francisco in the 60s, and I had some stuff that gave me some interesting experiences. My body completely disappeared. Everything the tonus of my system was completely perfect for my skeleton. There was nothing. I didn't need to feel anything. Anyway, I knew San Francisco very, very well in those days. I had been an epidemiologist for many years in San Francisco. And I walked home. The only problem was I walked for 2 hours in the wrong direction. I felt that great. My body totally disappeared. So I would like to ask, sometimes I thought of asking Russell, was I embodied or disembodied? What is the answer? Or ask Dan Siegel, who talked about the Planck thing in consciousness, which sounded to me like he was talking about at the beginning in Genesis, the Word, and then the Word became flesh, and it sounded, anyway, that's another kind of discussion. And then I would talk about another lesson that he gave me. And that was, he was in a funny mood. And to be honest, I should have known better, because Moshé was an interesting character. He had his moods, of course, like everyone. And I knew well enough by then, don't bother him when he's in one of his moods. But we had made an agreement about lessons. And so he gave me a lesson. At the end of the lesson, it was in 1981, I got up, and I don't really know what schizophrenia is. I don't know, but I felt schizophrenic. I felt like there was no me, there was no body, there was no emotional connection to this body. There was, I can't describe it. And I looked at him and I said, Moshe, what have you done to me? And he said to me, it'll be a good learning experience for you. That was his response. And it took me about 3 days to get it all, whatever. Ask, well, was I embodied or disembodied at that time? But whatever it was. But I'm explaining that, saying those things to you because Moshe gave lessons that were as tender as could be to people. And he gave lessons to people. And I've had this discussion with a number of trainers where, from my point of view, he never went with the pattern, or certainly didn't start with the pattern of the person. And he certainly wasn't gentle. But he knew enough to take the person to whatever extreme the person could handle, and the person would handle it because there was going to be change, like it or not. I had lessons with some of the original 13 people that he trained in Tel Aviv, who worked with me also like that. But I must say, to be quite honest, that I was in pain afterwards, sometimes for weeks from those lessons. I was never in pain after a Moshe lesson. And those were two examples of really quite different, where I was, in one sense, so completely organized that I felt great. I've had some wonderful experiences and have no body, and to be so completely organized was an extraordinary experience. And the other one was an extraordinary experience too. So anyway, but Moshe and I had conversations about all of his 13 people actually, and he loved a guy by the name of Shlomo Efrat, and I did too, because he had great hands. He always spoke about Shlomo's hands. Shlomo was a truck driver and became a practitioner, and it was like being, if you're a baby and you're suddenly in your father's arms and you just want to be totally embraced, held in a gracious, soft way, it's still strength. That was Shlomo's hands. Moshe's hands were not like that. Okay?
So I just want to dovetail on that because it says something already about, what Moshe said about that each one of us takes the work and puts it into our own handwriting.
Exactly.
But you're also bringing up the question for me about how certain things become like, I don't want to call it orthodox, but that, this is what we do. And
Exactly. That's why I'm telling you these stories. I'm agreeing with you completely. Like there's now seems to be an orthodoxy that we're only gentle with people, or there's an orthodoxy that you always go with the pattern first, or there's an orthodoxy that you can't be rough with a person. You can. I could tell you a personal story of what I just did in Brazil, but sometimes you need to give, Moshe would say, he did a cute thing in Amherst. He bit into an apple. And he says, sometimes you got to be aggressive. And you eat the apple and say, yeah, like that. And there are times where he was just a sweet, gentle soul with someone. And so, yeah, I don't like the orthodoxy. I think it's really bad for the work. And I have another thing about, I think the work is still, I think a lot of it is about the idea that there's potency in people, that people change in the work, because I have a little bit of disagreement with Larry, because Larry was talking about, we go back to our things and we return to our way of being, and it's mostly to help people after they return to their thing, after they've had a lesson. But I think the work is also about, we've just now been having a summit about people taking this work in so many directions. And when I do a training program, yes, I think it would be nice if the people become practitioners, or if they do become practitioners, at least I've helped them know how to do it in a decent way. But if they don't become practitioners and they want to use the work for the for dancing better, for riding horses better, for teaching people. Wow, that's fantastic. I was thinking about, I'm sitting in this house. You can't see much of the house, which is maybe good or not good, I don't know. But when I was a student at the same university as Larry, um, I lived with a guy who was an architect, and he became a famous architect. And I thought, wow, one of the things I would love to be as an architect. I think, God, I want to be an architect, but I can't draw and I can't do this. Well, 1990 came along, and I said, I think I can make a house. I think I can design a house. Why not? And this house is a creation of myself and a woman who, the mother of our son together, and a few other people, and it's a nice house, and people compliment me, and I became an architect. And I became an architect another time at a house in another state. And so I think that's great. You know, whether or not I became a decent practitioner or not, that's something else. At least maybe I became an architect for a moment or two. So I think there's a lot of value to what we're doing for people. And I think the summit proves that.
Right. And what you just described was, for me, it's about that the method allows me to be able to do what I want to do, right?
Exactly.
You realize an avowed or an unavowed dream by making your house. You didn't do it by having to go to architectural school. You did it in your way, in your handwriting. So now, I don't want to change the subject too much, but someone wrote in a question: what happened to Shlomo?
Shlomo has passed away. Moshe liked him in a way. He liked his hands. He didn't necessarily like so much his work, and he didn't ask him to be an assistant in the Amherst training. Shlomo, I mean, most of those people have passed away now. There's very, very few left of the original 13.
Right.
He gave beautiful lessons. I got some lessons from him. His hands were beautiful. Were they as potent, if you want to put it that way, as Moshe's? No. Have I gotten a few lessons? No one has ever given me a lesson as strongly as that first lesson of Moshe, or that one that I told you where he discombobulated me completely. But I have received great lessons from other people. Alexandra, who with her son together, she has given me extraordinary lessons. Some of the students in some of my trainings, I've said, hey, I can see how they're working. They give me extraordinary lessons. So, yeah, people are competent, of course. Jeff Heller has given me some great lessons, a few other people, yeah.
So just coming back to the travels with Moshe, you mentioned something about a famous coat of his. I don't think, I don't, some people probably who are attending know these stories, but since I never met the man, I was just curious, what's
this coat?
What's the magic coat?
The magic coat is, I think it's Moshe's way of, I have a friend who lives in Germany, and she used to take people traveling, hiking in Machu Picchu, and she's taken people on boat rides and been a captain of ships and taking them sailing and everything like that. I've gone walking with her in the woods, and she's always carrying a backpack of some sort. It's kind of like she can't think of going out someplace without some survival mechanism, because she's been in those kind of situations. Well, Moshe was like that. His coat he had a coat, and I used to pick it up and help him put it on. And in the coat, and I was really curious, what's all the weight of this coat all about? And so first of all, the coat had $10,000 in at least three kinds of denominations. So $10,000 three times in Swiss francs, French francs, and US dollars. Okay. because you never know when you have to leave a country like he did, France, and go to England, and you need money, or you need a diamond, or you need some way. So he always had cash, and usually I'd never realized that he was walking around with about $30,000. Well, it was a bit excessive, but that's what he had. He always had Band-Aids in the thing. He always had different kinds of penicillin in those days. The coat had all kinds of needles for sewing things. I can tell you a cute little story about that. He had certain scissors for cutting toenails. In one of the FI lessons.
In his coat, he carried.
In the coat, yeah,
Okay.
in his coat, he's carrying all this. Yeah, well, he's wearing all of this. Let's put it that way. I mean, there's just all of these kind of things that you think he has 2 tape recorders in case one doesn't work. He has batteries for the tape recorders. He has. Okay, he has pants. His pants are special pants because they're double sewn, because he's carrying stuff in his pockets and he doesn't want the pockets to rip. So they're specially made in England, and they're sewn twice like that. It's kind of like he's a survivalist. He knows if he gets into a car, he always checks, and it drove him crazy because by that time cars were starting to change a little bit. In the old days, cars were almost pretty much the same. You always had the same kind of doorknob, and you had the same kind of way to adjust the seat and things like that. He had to know. He examined everything. If in case car got in a crash, if the car got smoke, he wanted to know how he could get in, how he could get out. When he went into a strange house, where's the front door? Where's the back door? Is there a fire extinguisher? I'm telling you, that's how he was.
Awesome. So, of course, I have a zillion other questions, but I just wondered, as we're moving along here, whether you're open to hearing questions from other people.
Yes, I have to. Yes, sure, a little bit. But my friend Alexandra is sitting next to me, and she's reminding me there is one story.
Oh, please, go for it.
Because people have stories all the time about Moshé. And I asked him at one point, I said, Moshé, if you weren't doing Feldenkrais, if this isn't what you became in your life, what would you want to have been? And he said, oh, an actor. That's what he wanted to be. And it was interesting because sometimes he would tell stories, and a week later, he'd be telling the same thing to someone, and I go, wait a minute, this is a completely different story. What are you doing, Moshé? And I would check him out to see if I could tell if he was lying or if he knew. And there was no expression on his face if it was the same. I tell you that because there's all these stories about he was 12 years old when he left home, he was 13 years old, he was 14 years old, he came by himself, he went with a bunch of people. Well, I've heard all of those different stories from him at different times. So it depends who you're talking to. Well, Moti, I wanted to, because he gave a story about Moshé, which I think I might know the honest story about that one. Okay, because.
Oh boy, we're going to have a story battle, a story slam.
Battle, yeah. That story, well, it's interesting because it's hard to know what was Moshé's life really like and how did he live. And I mean, there's stories about.
Oops, your voice, your sound just went off.
Him with women and him not with women and all of those kind of things. But this story it's for Moti, because I thought somehow he needs to know. Because Moshé demonstrated this chokehold because he was short, but he knew how to use his skeleton and to lift someone up, and so they couldn't free themselves. So he said that's how he got an idea about. And then he told a story about the knife thing with Kano, going to Kano's place and like that. So Moshé used to do a thing, I'll show you. He would scratch here every once in a while. And one day I couldn't stand it anymore. And I said, what are you doing? Why are you scratching your elbow? He says, because there's a knife, tip of a knife blade in it. And I said, what? He says, well, you know that Kano, I went to see Kano in Paris. And Kano in those days he was the Japanese ambassador of all things to France. Okay, that's what he was doing. That's what he was doing in France. He was the Japanese ambassador. So Kano, he says, oh, Kano, Moshe somehow got a message to Kano that he invented this special way of having someone who comes at a knife with them and deflecting it. Okay, so he says, so he meets Kano, finds him in the audience, I don't know how, and he invites him into his car. Well, Moshe tells a story dramatically because the car is a Rolls Royce. He's there as the Japanese ambassador. So he sits in the back with Kano, and Kano takes him to his house and gives him tea and everything like that. And he says, can you show me this thing here with my servant? This Moshe's telling me this story, okay? And the servant, of course, happens to be his chief judoko, his main, to make sure that Moshe is going to deflect this knife, okay? So the guy comes at him, Moshe deflects the knife. What Moshe doesn't say, and what he bites his tongue and doesn't do, is that the tip of the knife broke off in the elbow, in the bone, and broke off, okay? That's what happened. That's how. And so Kano got very interested in Moshe, that he got rid of this thing and everything. And that's why he made him, well, he got one of his students to start teaching him judo. So that story is for you, Moti, if you're watching this.
Wow, it must have been quite a strike to break a knife point in his arm.
Yeah. Well, Moshe also has the long head of his biceps on one arm was torn too when he was doing judo one day. That's another story. I mean, there's many of these stories.
Right. And if Moshe was an actor, we don't really know. Was there really a knife blade in his elbow, or was that another story?
There was. Because I went over and I looked, and he showed it to me, and there was a piece of metal, a small little piece of metal in the bone. Yes. No, that's a true story.
Wow.
Now, if that's a true story about going to Kano and doing like that, I don't know, but that's a story he told me.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we have someone here who's had her hand up for a long time.
Okay.
You want to?
I don't know. I'm not going to try and find her because
no. I'll promote her.
Place. Okay.
Okay, and this is Susan Steele, and
okay.
So Susan, you're now on camera. I hope that's what you wanted, and you're unmuted. So do you have a question that you wanted to ask Jerry?
No.
And she's not responding. So maybe she just put her hand up for no reason.
Alexandra asked me to tell another story.
Okay, good.
Okay, while you're finding people. This story has to deal with the potent self, but I think most people know it. It's a book, the Potent Self book. I'm walking around Moshe's apartment and I see this here pile of papers. I say, what's that? And he says, it's a book I wrote. But I said, well, why isn't it published? He says, well, because it fell, I won't say what he was doing, but it involved a woman. And anyway, it fell on the floor, this here book. And it was spread all over the place, and it had 4 numbering systems to it. And I said, what is it called? He said, it's called the Potent Self. And I said, well, maybe I can put it back together for you. And he says, no, it's not possible. Anyway, of those 3 months, 2 weeks were devoted to my taking page by page and putting it all over the walls of this room that I was in, trying to figure out how the damn thing should get together. And I figured out the numbering system. And that's how the Potent Self got to be done. The rest of the story is that the last 2 chapters were never completed. And Baruch Feldenkrais, who is Moshe's brother, asked this woman friend of Moshe, and as well as one of the 13 people that were originally with Moshe in his study, to write the last 2 chapters. And Moshe said he wanted to write the last 2 chapters. So I don't know what the last two chapters are about, but that's how the potent self got to be started. Okay.
Yeah. And thank you, because, you know, I don't know about anybody else, but I loved the other books, but it was the potent self that
It's a great book.
it sort of sent me over the edge of realizing that this was so much more than just my sore back. That this, you know, because
Yes,
at
I
the
agree.
time that was what had led me to it. And so thank you, Jerry. That's just my own personal thank you for
Yeah,
that.
it's a pleasure for all of us.
Right. So far, I'm not seeing hands raised for questions. There is a question that I feel in some ways you've answered, but I'm going to read it the way the person wrote it, and maybe it will inspire you to go further with it. And that was, what did Jerry notice the most about Moshé giving FIs that he could impart to people in training now? I think that's a tough question, but
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
not to put you on the spot or anything, because I think that there's so many things.
There's so many things.
I'm sure you do it in your trainings.
I would, you know, Moshe, we say, what is it? Something about need is the mother of invention, or something like
Necessity, right?
that. Necessity is the mother of invention. I think that's how Moshe approached things in a way, that I would learn as many ATMs as you could. I would try practicing and touching people in as many ways as you can, gently as well as not gently, and be willing to try something that you didn't think you could, but that you feel it's worth trying. I know, for example, and I'll be very, very honest, in my training, we did almost nothing as far as, I think maybe one day is the most I recall, about bringing people from sitting to standing. I watched Moshe bring people from sitting to standing, and I watched Jeff Haller do it. And I thought about it, you know, because Moshe made me a trainer, which I think was inappropriate. I think it was our friendship that had him do that. And I think I only became a semi-decent practitioner and trainer by watching the Amherst trainings at least 12 times. I played them at least 12 times in training programs and stopped after the 12th time taking notes. And it's only after having to explain all the FIs that people were asking me what do they mean, that I started to realize, hey, I better start understanding and thinking about and doing all that. And so I think I got better at it.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided one day I've got to learn this. And I started trusting myself. And it got to the point where I felt that I could touch people and know whatever I needed to know by touching them. And that if I just trusted the ATMs, I could use them in a way that would help me give the person what I felt that they needed. You know, Hokusai, I love the Japanese artist Hokusai. Hokusai painted thousands and thousands of paintings. People don't realize maybe 60,000 paintings or some enormous number. But it was only when he got into his 70s where he said, you know, I think I can finally do a decent job. I hope that I did a decent job before the recent years. And I'm 80 years old now, and I'll soon probably stop doing this, but I don't know how to answer that person. I just say, try. You got to try. Moshe had put people on beds. Moshe put people on the floor. Moshe, I saw him give a FI on the floor. But I think you should also realize that Moshe was not always perfect. There's two things I would say that he said to me, which stopped me in my tracks. I was watching him. It was, I think, probably around 1979. I'm watching him work. I've just begun my own apprenticeship after my training finished in 77. And I'm watching him give lessons, and I know that he's giving a function, each one, something. I know something, the right thing is going on somehow. He's got it down. I said to him, Moshe, how do you know how to do the right, this thing, this organization, this what the person needs? And he said something to me, which I have till to this day. He said, you know, Jerry, to be honest, I don't think I've ever been consistent in giving a function except for maybe the last 6 or 7 years. And I thought, whoa, 6 or 7 years. I mean, he's been teaching ATM classes in Haifa, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem for 30 something years. And now he says, so I started to look at the Alexandrian Eye lessons different. You know, they're not always about function. They're about awareness. And sometimes they're about function. And sometimes, so that's one thing. That stopped me. So I don't know if that's a good answer for the person who heard this, but it's an answer. The other thing is like Moshe gave an advanced training in San Francisco, the only one he ever gave in 1981. In that training, he's working, it's not important who, and he's going along, and it's about the 45th minute, and you have another 5 minutes to go. And he says to the group, he says, you can see I don't know what I'm doing. That's what he says. And then he puts a board under the guy's knee, and he says, now I've got it. So I give you that as a story. There's another story where it's 1980, and there's a guy, Ken. Ken is this very nice guy. He's a psychologist, and he's going to get about 10 lessons. We signed him up for 10. It's the 4th lesson, and I'm videotaping. And I'm watching this lesson, and I'm thinking, I don't know what you're doing, Moshe, but you're killing the guy. And if you don't stop soon, you're going to make it terrible for this guy. It's awful what you're doing. And I feel like saying, Moshe, please stop. A few minutes later, because it's close to the end of the lesson, he walks up to the camera and he says into the camera, this lesson should be shown as how not to do functional integration. He says, that's what he says. I've seen Moshe, sometimes he was tired. He's working with a guy and the two of them fall off the table onto the floor. Seriously. So, I mean, I'm being very honest. But obviously, 99% of the time, he did a pretty decent job in his FI lessons and in his ATM things. But we're all human. Right. We're all, you know, that's the reality. Anyway, whoever the person is who asked that question, I wish them good luck.
I'm guessing that this, because it had said anonymous, but whoever it was, someone named Carrie said, thank you. What a wonderfully complex answer. So I'm hoping that she was the one who asked the question, because it was. And, you know, and it's interesting because what you just described, relating it to Hokusai, and the story of Hokusai as an artist, right? He was an artist, right. And he was using his creativity in order to create something. And then Moshe was also a doctor, a scientist. And so this, you know, this blending of creativity and science.
Yes, I agree. I agree completely. I think our work is really, I feel like I'm an artist when I'm doing and sometimes I'm better at my job, sometimes not. And sometimes, wow, I feel I did a great thing. And a lot of times, because there used to be a thing about, well, if the person doesn't feel different, then it wasn't a good FI. And I go, I'm not so sure that that's the appropriate thing, because some people, they leave the lesson and they go home and they say, you know, I don't feel a thing. It was a crap. I didn't learn anything, but my husband is different. My kid is different. And it's like that, you know. It's sometimes you get acknowledgement, but I agree completely with you. I'm very happy that you said that, because it is, I think we're really artists. And the nice thing about artists is that we can be artistic all the time, and we're great at it sometimes. And sometimes, I've seen videos of Picasso painting. It's so incredibly interesting. From the backside, he's painting, and then after 20 minutes, he erases, and then he starts again, and then he erases again, and he does another one, but at the end, he's turned out this Picasso. But it's so many changes, so much whatever, and it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. Anyway, I hope he's got the artistic whatever in him or her.
Well, and it goes back to the metaphor you gave at the beginning of the clay, the potter and the clay, that in some ways working with us was like, we are the medium, we are the medium, we are the instrument, and all of those things. So yeah, well, wish you could come to our conference in September, which is called The Art and Science of Transformation. So, so it's got all those elements in it, I hope. We'll see. We'll see.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I'll probably be starting a new training program in Germany.
Well, and actually, this is a good moment. If there's anything that you want to tell the audience about things that you're doing, programs that you're developing, this is a good moment. Go for it.
Well, we are starting a new training program in Germany, a 9th one in a certain place. It's on an island in the largest lake in southern Germany with the Alps behind. So if you get bored with the training, you can go outside and enjoy yourself. We're starting a new one, and maybe my last one there, I don't know, because of age. I'm happy to say I'm starting a couple of trainings in China, in mainland China. They're going to start, and you don't need to speak Chinese because it's going to be in English and translated, but I think they're pretty full. I made an experiment. After watching some of the people, I want to incorporate some of the work of a few of them, especially with the vagus nerve, and I think the lady's name was Jeffries or Susan, I forget her name.
The vagus nerve is probably
Eleanor, no, but there was another lady who talked about, I think her name is Cynthia, maybe, I don't remember, but I've written down a lot of notes about some of the things she talked about.
She's actually listening to this interview right now.
Because I want to say Moshé knew that stuff, and Moshé did a lot of that stuff. He did stuff with the ears, and he did stuff here, and he did with the trigeminal nerve, and he did. And
she just said hi.
Okay, hi.
She's there.
and he knew all that, and he did a lot of stuff with the abdomen and the vagus nerve that Eleanor is talking about, and I've done a lot of that stuff too, and I've noticed the results on people because I watched Moshé do things, and okay, Moshé, what the hell are you doing here? And so I'm trying it and feeling it, but mostly I'm feeling it through my hands, and it made a lot of sense. So anyway, I put together a thing called harmonizing the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And it's a 3-day seminar I gave to some people, and it's you can get it if you want on my website. But the conversations that we've had at the summit, man, my brain started going and I got getting even more. So I want to thank you and Cynthia for doing this. Sometimes I must confess, I think it's just too many people. It's just overwhelming, and I would do less myself, less people. But at the same time, it's been a really exciting experience.
Right, and I know that Cynthia's intention was to really create an impact, right, for the whole world to be able to see that there is so much depth and richness to this work. And so, yes, it is too much, which is why, of course, she has the lifetime upgrade that people can have access forever. But, everyone has been trying to take in as much as they can as we're going along. So, yeah, it definitely is an adventure. So we actually have time for one question, which you may or may not want to, or you might not know the answer to it.
Okay,
But
I've not been looking at the time. How are we doing on
we have
time?
1 minute left. So
Oh,
in 1
okay.
minute, this question was from Francine Bonjour Carter, and she said, "I've heard that Moshe did not really want the method to bear his name. This is a story we hear all the time. If this is true, how did he call the work?"
No, I've never heard that.
Ah, well, there you go.
And I would not believe that. I've never heard of
Interesting.
saying no. I
So,
cannot corroborate that at all.
so the stories that come around to us, we
Oh,
don't
I've
even.
heard stories. If I could tell you some of the stories about the things that he supposedly said, if I can tell you some of the stories that I supposedly said, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Well,
It's like what's going on right now in the world on Facebook and everywhere else, and the news media and everything. It's insane.
so we can say that that was fake news then.
That is definitely fake news. That's a fake news one.
So Jerry, do you have anything that you want to say to the world in closing about your work, Moshe, the experience?
Sometimes you're given something in life by, you can call it the green monster, you can call it God, you can call it kismet, that you're fortunate enough to be in a place where neuroses match. Moshe needed a son and I needed a strong father for a while. And the two of you get together and the universe says, now you're going to do something together that is above and beyond who you are. That's it.
Thank you so much. This has been such an honor.
Thank you.
Really, truly, Jerry. And I wish you all the best. And I hope that one of these days our paths cross in person.
Me too.
And that is the end of our interview. Once again, I'm Lavinia Plonka, and please join us for the rest of the summit. We still have a couple more days. Thank you so much. Blessings, Jerry. Bye-bye.
Blessings to you. Bye-bye.